The galaxy was wide, full of stars and full of many kinds of life. Civilizations had risen and fallen over thousands of years, and great empires stretched across the void. Among them was the Zalar Empire, a proud and ancient race. They were tall, their skin like polished stone, and their voices carried authority like rolling thunder. At the heart of their empire sat the Queen of Zalar, ruler of countless worlds, feared by her enemies and admired by her people. To the Zalar, power meant strength. They valued towering warriors, soldiers who could crush enemies with their bare hands and armies that marched like storms. For them, battles were tests of raw power. Subtlety and patience were seen as weakness. Victory meant showing overwhelming force, and no race could challenge them in this way. Then came the humans. They were newcomers to the galaxy. Their ships were small, their technology young compared to the empires of old. But humans had spread quickly. They had joined trade networks, learned alien tongues, and made friends in places where no one expected them to survive. To the Zalar, however, humans were laughable. They looked fragile, short, soft-skinned, lacking claws, lacking scales, lacking the towering builds of true warriors. What strength could such beings hold? The Queen had heard rumors. Some alien merchants spoke of humans fighting with unusual tactics. Others whispered that humans had an unbreakable will, that they could adapt faster than anyone else. But to her, these were stories meant to amuse. She had never seen proof, and so she did what rulers often do when they believe themselves. Above others, she dismissed it. On the day of the Great Arena Festival, the Queen sat upon her golden throne. The arena was carved into the ground of Zalar's capital world, wide enough to hold 10,000 fighters. The seats around it stretched high into the sky, filled with the roars and cheers of the Empire's people. This was more than entertainment. It was tradition. Champions from different worlds came to test their strength before the Queen. It was said that only those who impressed her could earn a place in the Empire's army. The Queen leaned on her throne, her jeweled crown gleaming beneath the bright sun. Around her stood advisors and guards, all armored in silver. Before her, the announcers declared the start of the games. Alien warriors from across the stars entered the arena, their weapons shining, their bodies trained for combat. The crowd shouted as they displayed their skills, giants with blades, beasts with armor plates, and trained fighters moving with precision. The Queen smiled as she watched. These were warriors. These were the ones worthy of battle. Then, one of her advisors whispered into her ear. A new competitor had entered the festival, one not from the Empire, but from the young race that had just joined the galaxy's alliance. A human. The Queen raised an eyebrow. "A human dares to stand in my arena?" she asked, her voice carrying across the chamber. The crowd murmured in confusion. Few had ever seen a human, and those who had thought little of them. "Yes, Majesty," said the advisor. "He is requested to fight in the trial. He calls himself Captain Marcus Hale of Earth." The Queen's lips curved into a laugh. Her laugh echoed across the chamber, deep and full of amusement. "A human warrior?" she said with mockery. "What comedy this is. Do they hope to impress me with a creature so fragile? Very well. Let the human fight. Let him stand before the Empire's strength. Perhaps his failure will teach his people humility." The crowd roared with laughter and cheers. They wanted to see this small, soft-skinned being fall. To them, it was entertainment. The announcers quickly prepared the stage, spreading the news. A human would fight in the Queen's arena. As the gates opened, the human stepped into the sunlight. He wore simple armor, nothing grand compared to the shining plates of the Zalar champions. His helmet covered his face, but his form was clear, shorter, leaner, lacking the heavy muscles of the aliens around him. To the crowd, he looked out of place, almost fragile. The Queen leaned forward, studying him. "This is what humanity calls a warrior," she whispered to her guards. "He looks like a child among giants." The guards chuckled. The advisors smiled. The laughter of the people grew louder, but Marcus Hale did not flinch. He walked calmly, step by step, into the center of the arena. His movements were not of pride, nor of fear. They were steady, controlled, as if he had walked into many arenas before. He stopped at the center and looked up at the queen. Though his face was hidden by the helmet, his posture spoke clearly. He was not afraid. The announcer's voice rose. Before the Queen of Zalar, ruler of the galaxy, we present the challenger, Marcus Hale of Earth. The crowd booed and jeered. They shouted insults in alien tongues. Some waved their arms, calling for the fight to begin quickly, eager to see the human crushed. Others laughed so hard they could barely breathe. The queen raised her hand and the noise lowered. She wanted to see this with her own eyes. She wanted to watch how quickly the human would fall. "Bring in the champion," she commanded. From the opposite gate, the Zalar warrior entered. He was a giant, nearly 3 times the human size, his body wrapped in black armor. His weapon was a massive axe, taller than Marcus himself. The ground shook with each step he took. The crowd cheered, shouting his name. He was one of the Queen's finest, undefeated in countless matches. The Queen smiled with pride. "This is what true strength looks like," she declared, "and this human will learn it today." The 2 fighters stood across from each other. The giant warrior looked down at Marcus, his eyes glowing through his helmet. He slammed the axe against the ground, sending dust into the air. Marcus, however, only shifted his stance, calm and watchful. The queen leaned back, certain of what would happen. To her, the fight was already over. The human was too small, too weak, too untrained to stand even a moment against such power. She laughed again, and the crowd followed her laughter. The drums of the arena thundered. The announcer raised his voice. "The trial begins." The gates shut. The fighters were locked inside. Dust swirled in the hot air. The giant warrior raised his axe high, preparing to strike with all his might. The crowd shouted. The queen's eyes gleamed with amusement, and Marcus Hale, the lone human, tightened his grip on his weapon, his body still and focused, waiting for the storm to come. The queen was sure he would be crushed in seconds. She was sure his people would be humbled. She was sure this would be nothing more than a moment of laughter. But what she did not know, what none of them knew, was that this human was about to change everything. The crowd of the arena roared as the giant warrior raised his axe. Dust swirled in the air. Banners shook with the sound of alien voices, and the queen herself leaned forward on her throne. She had already decided how the story would end. The human would fall, and his weakness would be remembered as a lesson to his kind. But Marcus Hale was not thinking about the laughter around him. He was not thinking about the queen or the jeering audience. His mind was calm, his eyes sharp. Years of training had taught him one simple truth. The moment you let noise control you, you lost the battle before it began. He studied his opponent. The alien warrior was massive, covered in armor, his muscles bulging with power. Every movement was heavy but strong, like a hammer ready to strike. Marcus knew he could never match that strength. But battles were not only about strength, they were about patience, awareness, and choices. The announcer's voice echoed through the arena. "Let the trial begin." The giant charged, swinging, his axe down with terrifying force. The ground shook as the blade struck, sending dust and stone flying. The crowd shouted in delight, expecting to see the human broken in the very first strike. But when the dust cleared, Marcus was not there. He had moved quick as a shadow, rolling to the side just before the axe landed. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat, surprised. The queen raised one eyebrow. The human had survived the first blow. Marcus stood again, his posture steady. He did not attack yet. He did not rush forward. He waited, studying the alien's stance, the way his axe moved, the weight of his steps. Every fighter, no matter how strong, had patterns. Marcus only needed to see them. The giant warrior growled, lifting his axe once more. He swung again, this time from the side, aiming to crush Marcus with a sweeping strike. Once more, Marcus dodged, stepping just out of reach, letting the axe slam into the ground with wasted power. The queen laughed softly. "He runs like prey," she said. "Soon he will tire. Strength always wins." But not everyone laughed. A few of the queen's advisors leaned forward, watching the human carefully. They saw something the others did not. The human was not running in fear. He was moving with purpose, always watching, always calculating. The giant roared in anger, swinging faster now. Strike after strike fell, each one powerful enough to shatter stone. But each time Marcus was gone before the blow could land. His boots left small marks in the sand, forming a circle around his opponent. He was not avoiding the fight, he was shaping it. Minutes passed, and the alien warrior's breaths grew heavier. His swing slowed, his shoulders tightened. The crowd began to notice. "Why does he not fall?" some shouted. "Why does he not fight back?" others asked. The laughter turned uneasy. Marcus finally moved closer, tapping the edge of the giant's armor with his blade. Not enough to wound, but enough to sting pride. The warrior roared, slamming his axe down again. Once more Marcus slipped away. The dust rose higher, and the alien's anger burned hotter. The queen's smile faded slightly. "Interesting," she whispered. "He plays with patience." Marcus knew his opponent's weakness now. The giant was powerful, yes, but he wasted energy with every heavy strike. His armor slowed him, his weapon drained him. If Marcus kept his focus, the alien would tire himself out. The fight continued, a dance of strength against strategy. The giant struck harder, faster, each swing more desperate. Marcus moved with precision, conserving his energy, letting his enemy exhaust himself. The crowd no longer laughed. They leaned forward, holding their breath. For the first time, the human struck with intent. As the axe came down once more, Marcus slid to the side, stepping close enough to slash at the alien's leg armor. Sparks flew as steel met steel. The cut was shallow, but it was a message. Marcus could strike if he wished. The giant roared louder, his pride wounded. He swung wildly, chasing Marcus around the arena. But his movements lost their rhythm. His steps grew heavy, his breaths ragged. The human remained calm, waiting for the perfect moment. High above, the queen no longer laughed. She watched closely, her golden eyes following every step. She could see the difference now. The human was not fragile. He was not weak. He was clever. He was patient. And patience, she realized, was a kind of strength she had not valued. The announcer's voice rose again. "The human still stands," he shouted, his tone filled with surprise. The crowd echoed his words. "The human still stands." Some of the Zalar people shouted with pride for their champion, but others began to cheer for Marcus. The idea was shocking, cheering for an outsider, a human. Yet the sight before them demanded respect. Marcus did not let the noise distract him. He could see the alien's fatigue now, the slight stumble in his steps, the slower swings of the axe. The battle was not over, but the tide had shifted. The queen leaned back in her throne, silent. She no longer mocked. She no longer smiled. She studied. Who was this human, she wondered? How could someone so small, so ordinary, still stand against one of her finest? Marcus Hale did not know her thoughts. He knew only the fight. And in his mind there was no room for doubt. He had faced many battles before, on Earth, in space, on distant colonies. Each time he had learned that survival was not about being the strongest. It was about being the one who did not give up, the one who adapted, the one who endured. Now, in the grand arena of the Zalar Empire, before the queen herself, Marcus was proving that truth once more. The round was not yet finished, but already, the story of this battle had changed. No longer was it a moment of mockery. It was becoming a test of whether the galaxy would continue to laugh at humans, or whether it would begin to respect them. And as the sun burned high above the arena, and the giant warrior struggled to keep his breath steady, Marcus Hale lifted his blade, ready for the next strike. The human challenger stood tall, and for the first time the Queen of Zalar felt a spark of curiosity instead of scorn. The sun shone bright above the arena, casting long shadows across the sand. The giant Zalar warrior stood in the center, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Sweat dripped beneath his armor, though his pride would not let him admit. Across from him, Captain Marcus Hale stood steady, his body calm, his blade still. The queen leaned forward on her throne, her golden crown catching the light. Her laughter from earlier had faded. Now her eyes followed the human with sharp interest. The crowd, too, had changed. They were no longer only laughing. Many whispered among themselves, wondering how this human had lasted so long. The announcer's voice carried across the arena. The first round is not yet decided. The human still stands. The champion still fights. The battle continues. The giant warrior roared and charged forward, his axe raised high. Sand sprayed from under his feet as he rushed like a storm. The crowd cheered at his power. Marcus waited until the last moment, then moved. His body slipped to the side, quick and controlled, the axe smashing into the ground where he had stood only a second before. The earth shook with the impact, cracks spreading across the sand. Before the giant could lift his weapon again, Marcus struck. His blade flashed, hitting the alien's side. Sparks flew, leaving a mark across the armor. It was not deep, but it was enough to show skill. The crowd gasped. For the first time, the human had drawn a true strike. The giant roared in anger, swinging his axe in a wide arc. Marcus ducked low, feeling the wind of the weapon pass above him. He rolled forward, coming up behind the alien's legs, and struck again. This time, his blade cut across the joint of the armor. The giant stumbled, his steps uneven. The crowd shouted louder now. Some cheered for the alien, calling for him to crush the human. But others, against all tradition, cheered for Marcus. His movements were sharp, his strikes clever. He was not just surviving, he was fighting back. The queen's fingers tapped against the arm of her throne. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the human. His strength was not in size. It was in control, in patience, in precision. He fought as if every step, every breath had meaning. The giant warrior turned, swinging his axe downward with all his might. Marcus barely escaped, the blade smashing into the ground and sending dust flying into the air. For a moment, both fighters vanished in the cloud of sand. The crowd leaned forward, waiting. From the cloud came the sound of steel striking steel. When the dust cleared, Marcus was standing close to the giant, his blade pressed against the alien's arm. With a sharp twist, he struck again, leaving another mark on the armor. The giant bellowed, his pride burning brighter than the pain. He swung his free hand, aiming to strike Marcus down with sheer force. But the human slipped back, just out of reach. His boots slid in the sand, but his stance stayed balanced. The queen finally spoke, her voice low but carrying across the chamber. This human, he does not fight with strength. He fights with patience. Her advisors glanced at one another, unsure how to answer. None of them had expected the human to last this long. None of them had expected him to fight like this. The crowd's energy grew wild. Every dodge, every strike, every near miss sent waves of sound through the arena. The Zaylor were used to battles of power, of crushing blows and broken shields. But this battle was different. It was not only about strength. It was about endurance, intelligence, and timing. The giant warrior's armor now bore several marks. None were fatal, but together they told a story. The human was not powerless. Each cut, each strike showed that Marcus was slowly shaping the fight. The alien roared again, lifting his axe high above his head. With both hands, he brought it down, faster than before, aiming to end the battle with one final blow. The crowd held their breath, the queen's eyes locked on the human. At the last instant, Marcus moved, not away, but forward. He stepped into the strike, his body close to the giant's. The axe crashed into the sand behind him, missing by inches. In that heartbeat, Marcus struck upward, his blade cutting across the alien's shoulder. Sparks burst as the armor cracked slightly. The alien stumbled backward with a growl of pain. The arena exploded with sound. Half the crowd cheered for the alien to rise again, but the other half now shouted the human's name. Marcus! Marcus! The chant grew louder, echoing across the seats. The queen remained silent, but her eyes glimmered. She had expected comedy. She had expected weakness. Instead, she saw a battle worth watching. Marcus stood tall, his chest rising with steady breaths. He did not lift his arms in victory, nor shout to the crowd. His focus stayed on his opponent. He knew the fight was not finished. Pride had defeated many fighters before, but he would not make that mistake. The giant warrior pushed himself up, his breaths heavy, his pride wounded. His glowing eyes locked on Marcus with fury. He had never been challenged like this. To him, this human was an insult, a small creature that dared to strike him again and again. With a roar, he charged once more. Marcus moved carefully, letting the giant's speed become his weakness. He sidestepped, then struck at the alien's back. Another mark. Another spark. The alien turned, swinging wildly, but Marcus was already gone, moving to the other side. The fight became a storm of dust and steel. The alien's power shook the ground, but Marcus's movements shaped the flow. He was never where the giant expected him to be. Each miss made the warrior weaker, each wasted strike draining his strength. The crowd shouted in waves, sometimes cheering the alien, sometimes cheering the human. Their voices mixed, the sound rising into the sky. For the first time in the history of the arena, a human was not only fighting but winning the crowd. The queen stood slowly from her throne. Her advisors looked at her in surprise. She rarely rose during a match, but now her eyes burned with focus. She wanted to see every detail. Marcus's blade struck again, leaving another cut across the alien's leg armor. The giant dropped to one knee, his strength failing. His axe dragged against the sand, too heavy to lift quickly now. The queen raised her hand, signaling for silence. The crowd fell quiet, waiting. Marcus stood before the giant, his blade ready. He could strike again. He could finish the fight, but instead he stepped back, his weapon lowered slightly. His message was clear. The alien had fought well, but the battle's tide had turned. The queen's eyes narrowed, studying the human's choice. He had not ended the fight with pride. He had shown control, respect, and discipline. The announcer's voice rose, carrying across the silent arena. The human challenger still stands. The champion struggles. The battle is not yet finished. The queen's laughter was gone. Her scorn was gone. In its place was something new, curiosity, and perhaps even a touch of respect. The battle was still unfolding, but already the galaxy would never forget this moment. A human had stood in the queen's arena, and he had fought not with size, but with something far greater. And the Queen of Zalar, for the first time in her reign, wondered what else humans were capable of. The arena fell silent. The giant Zalar warrior had never faced an opponent like Marcus Hale. His armor bore scratches and marks from precise, clever strikes. His movements, once confident and powerful, were now slowed by exhaustion. Yet he still glared down at the human challenger, unwilling to admit defeat. Pride had always been the strength of Zalar warriors, and it would not yield easily. Marcus stood steady, his breathing calm. Each movement had been deliberate. He had observed the giant's strength, studied his timing, and learned his patterns. Now he was ready for the next phase of the battle, a phase the queen herself did not expect. From her throne, the queen leaned forward. Her eyes, sharp and golden, followed every step Marcus took. Earlier she had laughed at humans, calling them weak. Now she could see that this one human possessed something extraordinary. His power was not in muscle or size. It was in strategy, in patience, and in heart. The queen's advisors whispered among themselves, unsure how to respond to what they were witnessing. The giant warrior roared and charged again. His axe, heavy and menacing, swung in wide arcs. Each blow shook the ground and forced Marcus to move quickly, sometimes rolling, sometimes stepping to the side, barely avoiding the crushing impact. Dust and sand rose into the air, blurring the edges of the arena. The crowd held their breath. Some had begun to cheer for Marcus, unable to deny his skill, while others still shouted for their champion to rise. But even they were beginning to watch more than cheer. Marcus's mind worked like a clock. He noted the giant's fatigue. Each swing of the axe demanded more energy, yet it delivered less precision than before. The warrior's armor, once a source of invincibility, now slowed him further. Marcus moved closer, careful not to overextend. He was patient, waiting for the perfect opening. The giant swung his axe down in a powerful strike, aiming to finish the battle. Marcus ducked at the last moment and stepped to the side, letting the weapon crash into the sand. Sparks flew from the impact, but Marcus was already behind the giant, ready to strike. He tapped the edge of the warrior's armor, leaving a faint mark, enough to remind the alien that the human was more than a fleeting annoyance. The crowd gasped at the precision. The queen's eyebrows raised slightly. She had expected humans to be fragile, easy to defeat. But Marcus was proving that size and strength were not the only forms of power. Intelligence, adaptability, and courage could be just as formidable. The giant roared in frustration, swinging again, more wildly now. Each miss weakened him, each wasted strike sapped energy from his massive arms. Marcus used the arena itself to his advantage. He dodged near walls, using their support to pivot quickly. He stepped over uneven ground to force the giant to adjust his stance. Every move was intentional, every retreat measured. Minutes passed, and the battle grew more intense. The giant's breathing was ragged. He had underestimated this human, and now he was paying the price. Marcus's calm and steady approach contrasted with the alien's increasing impatience. The crowd noticed the shift. Whispers spread through the arena, as many spectators realized the human was changing the fight. This was no longer just entertainment. It was a lesson in skill and endurance. The giant roared once more, raising his axe for a final, desperate blow. Marcus stepped to the side, narrowly avoiding it. He took the moment to strike with precision. His blade flashed across the giant's armor, hitting the joint of the leg. Sparks burst from the metal. The alien stumbled, nearly losing balance. The crowd erupted into a mix of cheers and shouts. The queen herself leaned forward, her face showing an expression she had never shown before. Intrigue. Marcus did not pause. He pressed the advantage carefully, striking at weak points in the giant's armor. Each move was calculated. He did not aim to destroy, only to expose the warrior's vulnerability. The giant tried to counter, but his swings were slower, less controlled. His size, which had been his greatest asset, now made him clumsy. Marcus moved with precision, striking with skill, and retreating before the alien could recover. The crowd could not believe what they were seeing. A human, small and seemingly fragile, was outmaneuvering a Zalar champion. The whispers grew louder. Some of the queen's advisors began to take notes. They saw patterns in Marcus's strategy, and even they could not deny its brilliance. The Sierra. Queen leaned back, studying the human closely. She realized something important. Humans were not strong in the way Zalar believed strength existed. They were clever, adaptable, and resilient. Perhaps this human, and his kind, could survive where others could not. The giant warrior let out a roar of frustration, swinging wildly. Marcus ducked and rolled, then ran along the side of the arena. He spotted a narrow platform near one corner, and dashed toward it. The giant turned to follow, but his movements were slower. Marcus leapt onto the platform, gaining height and perspective. From this vantage point, he could see the patterns in the giant's attacks more clearly. With careful steps, Marcus began to circle the warrior, forcing him to move in ways that drained his energy even faster. The giant swung, the blade missing, again and again. Each miss sent dust into the air, each failed strike increasing the fatigue in his massive arms. Marcus struck lightly at weak points, marking the armor but never attempting to deliver a fatal blow. He was teaching the warrior a lesson, showing him that intelligence could rival brute force. The giant roared again, furious. He swung the axe with full power, aiming for Marcus on the platform. Marcus jumped to the side, landing smoothly. His balance was perfect, his mind focused. Every movement was controlled, precise, and deliberate. The crowd now watched in awe. They had expected comedy and weakness, but they were witnessing skill and strategy on display. The queen's eyes narrowed. She had ruled many battles, seen countless warriors fall and rise, but this human was different. He fought with courage and wisdom. He did not rely on brute strength, yet he remained unbroken. The queen realized that this human could teach her people something they had long forgotten, that strength was more than muscle, it was also mind and heart. Marcus spotted an opening. The giant had overextended on a swing, leaving a gap near his shoulder. With quick steps, Marcus moved forward and struck precisely. Sparks flew as his blade hit armor and metal met steel. The giant staggered backward, his balance faltering. The crowd gasped. Even the alien spectators, long accustomed to seeing only overwhelming power, began to see the human as a warrior worth respecting. The giant roared, swinging wildly one last time. Marcus sidestepped, rolling beneath the massive blade. He struck again, hitting the leg joint and leaving the giant on one knee. The arena erupted with sound. The queen remained silent, watching intently. Her laughter was gone. She had expected mockery. Instead, she saw courage, skill, and resilience. Marcus lowered his blade slightly, not in fear, but in respect. He had shown the giant warrior that humans could fight with intelligence, endurance, and heart. The giant looked up at him, chest heaving, pride wounded, but alive. This was a turning point, not only in the battle, but in the way the Queen and the galaxy would view humanity. The announcer shouted, voice trembling with excitement, "The human challenger stands." The giant struggles, the tide has turned. The crowd, once laughing, now cheered in awe. Humans had been underestimated, now they were respected. The Queen, sitting tall on her throne, studied Marcus carefully. She had laughed before, she had doubted. But now she saw something extraordinary, a human who could stand against the strongest of the Zaylor, not with raw power, but with courage, strategy, and discipline. For the first time in her long reign, the Queen felt curiosity instead of scorn. She wanted to see how far this human could go. She wanted to see the limits of human skill, and perhaps she realized there were lessons even the Zaylor could learn from them. The battle was far from over. The giant warrior still stood, proud and defiant. But the arena had changed. The crowd had changed. And in the eyes of the Queen, humanity had begun to earn respect. Marcus Hale stood tall, calm, and ready. His heart was steady, his mind sharp. He knew the next moves would be crucial. But he also knew this: strength was not always what it seemed. And today, in the grand arena of the Zaylor Empire, he was proving it. The arena was silent, the dust settling slowly over the golden sands. The giant Zaylor warrior, once the pride of the Empire, struggled to stay upright. His chest heaved, his breaths came in sharp gasps, and sweat ran down the ridges of his massive armor. Marcus Hale, the human challenger, stood steady before him, calm and controlled. His blade was lowered slightly, but his eyes held the same sharp focus that had carried him through the battle. The Queen leaned forward, her golden crown glinting in the light. She had watched every move, every dodge, every strike. Earlier, she had laughed at humans, believing them weak and unworthy of the title warrior. But now she realized how wrong she had been. Strength was not always measured in size nor in muscle. Marcus had proven that courage, intelligence, and patience could match, and even surpass, the mightiest force of her empire. The crowd was quiet, still in awe of what they had witnessed. Some spectators shouted their admiration for the human. Others looked on in disbelief. For many, this battle had challenged everything they had believed about humans. They had come expecting comedy, a moment of ridicule. Instead, they had witnessed skill, endurance, and heart. The giant warrior, exhausted and humiliated, fell to one knee. His massive hands gripped the sand, trying to find strength to rise, but his body betrayed him. Pride was all he had left, and even that pride trembled. Marcus took a measured step forward, placing himself a respectful distance away. He did not raise his blade to strike. He did not taunt or boast. His calm presence spoke louder than any words could. The Queen finally stood from her throne, her robes flowing like liquid gold. Her expression was serious, her eyes fixed on the human before her. The court fell silent, waiting. This was a moment they would remember for generations. Human. The Queen's voice rang across the arena, clear and commanding. You have fought in my grand arena, not with brute force, but with intelligence and discipline. You have shown skill, patience, and courage. For that, I acknowledge you. The words echoed through the stands. The crowd gasped. For the first time, the Queen had publicly praised a human. Her golden eyes studied Marcus closely, as if trying to understand the source of his strength. Marcus bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect rather than pride. He did not seek glory. He did not seek praise. He had fought for honor, for the challenge, and for the lesson that strength could take many forms. The giant warrior looked up at him, chest heaving. He had been defeated but not humiliated beyond reason. He slowly rose, shaking his head, and nodded to the human. The gesture was simple, but it carried deep meaning. Respect had been earned, even between two very different species. The Queen raised her hands to silence the crowd. The spectators leaned forward, eager to hear her words. She spoke slowly, deliberately. "Let it be known across the Zalar Empire and the galaxy," she said, "that humans are not weak. They may lack the size or the natural strength of our champions, but they possess something far greater: courage, wisdom, and resilience. These qualities make them worthy of respect, and perhaps even worthy of friendship." A murmur of approval rose among the crowd. Some clapped, others bowed their heads, and many whispered words of admiration. This was no ordinary moment in the history of the arena. Today, a human had changed the way the Zalar, and perhaps the galaxy, would view an entire species. Marcus lowered his blade completely, standing tall but humble. He looked at the giant warrior, who nodded once more in acknowledgement. Then he turned to the Queen, who now regarded him with something more than curiosity. She regarded him with respect. "You have earned this respect," the Queen said, "and, perhaps in time, humans and Zalar can learn from each other. Strength is not always what it seems. Today you have taught us that lesson." Marcus did not speak immediately. Words were unnecessary. His actions had already spoken. But then, in a clear and steady voice, he said, "Your Majesty, it is an honor to fight in your arena. I have learned much from this experience, and I hope that humans and Zalar can understand each other better through respect and courage." The Queen nodded. "Perhaps the galaxy has underestimated humans," she said softly. "Today, they will not be underestimated again." The crowd erupted in cheers. The spectators had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a fight, but a story of honor, courage, and understanding. Humans had proven themselves, not through brute strength, but through intelligence, strategy, and heart. Even the youngest, in the audience watching wide-eyed, would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. The giant warrior approached Marcus once more. He extended a massive hand, and Marcus took it without hesitation. The gesture was symbolic, bridging the gap between species. The crowd cheered louder, recognizing that this was not just a victory. It was a connection, a recognition that differences could be overcome through respect and courage. The Queen returned to her throne, her expression thoughtful. She had witnessed many battles in her reign, but none like this. This human had not only survived, but had impressed her beyond expectation. Perhaps humanity would be a force in the galaxy, a species that could rise through intellect, courage, and adaptability rather than sheer power. Marcus looked around the arena, seeing the thousands of spectators and the massive walls that surrounded them. He felt no fear, only respect for the traditions of the Zalar Empire and for the creatures he had faced. He had come to fight, and he had done so with honor. That was all that mattered. The Queen rose once more, raising her voice so the entire arena could hear. "Let this be a lesson to all who doubt humans," she said. "They may be young in the galaxy, small in size and soft in appearance, but their hearts are strong, their minds sharp, and their will unbreakable. Today, humanity has proven itself worthy of respect." The spectators cheered, their voices rising like a wave of sound. Humans, once thought weak and unworthy, were now seen as courageous and capable. Today's battle had changed opinions, hearts, and perhaps even the future of intergalactic relations. Marcus looked toward the Queen, who now offered a small but genuine smile. That smile said more than words ever could. It said that respect had been earned and that humans had a place in the galaxy not only as survivors, but as equals worthy of consideration. The giant warrior, exhausted but alive, bowed to Marcus one last time. The human nodded in return. No, weapons were raised unnecessarily. No pride had been crushed beyond repair. Instead, understanding and respect had been shared, bridging the gap between species. The Queen's voice carried once more across the arena. Bring the human to the center. Let him stand not as a challenger but as an example of what courage and intelligence can achieve. Marcus stepped forward, the dust from the battle rising around him. He raised his blade briefly in acknowledgement, not as a weapon, but as a sign of honor. The crowd erupted into applause, the sound echoing across the arena and the city beyond. Today, a human had fought not just for himself, but for his species. The Queen leaned back on her throne, her eyes thoughtful. She had laughed before, she had doubted, but now she understood. Humans were not weak. They were clever, courageous, and capable of remarkable things. And in the galaxy, that would make all the difference. Marcus Hale, the human warrior, stood, tall in the center of the arena. He had faced the strongest of the Zaylor and had not only survived but had earned respect, honor, and perhaps even friendship. His heart remained humble, his mind clear, and his spirit unbroken. He had fought with courage, patience, and intelligence, proving that humans could hold their own in a galaxy filled with giants. The Queen finally spoke one last time, her voice carrying across the arena. Let this day be remembered. Let the story of Marcus Hale be told across worlds so that no one underestimates humans again. Today a warrior has risen, not by strength alone, but by courage, skill, and heart. The crowd cheered louder than ever. Humans had been laughed at, mocked, and underestimated. Today they had earned respect. And as Marcus Hale looked toward the stars above, he knew this was only the beginning of humanity's journey among the stars. The battle had ended, but the story would live on. A human had proven that strength was not measured by size or muscle alone. It was measured by courage, intelligence, endurance, and heart. And in that measure, humanity had shown itself, capable of greatness beyond imagination.